Despite being Simba's mother and playing such an integral role in the first Lion King movie, Sarabi was oddly absent from the sequel, and that's always sort of rubbed fans the wrong way. Well, according to a couple of fan theories, there's actually a good reason for Sarabi not being in The Lion King 2, and some suggest that it might be a dark one. But let's take it from the top. Honestly, one of the most likely scenarios that would explain the absence of Sarabi in The Lion King 2 would simply be the fact that the creators didn't think she was necessary for that part of Simba's story. You see, Sarabi played a massive role in the first film. She helped to raise Simba alongside Mufasa and taught him the importance of being a morally upright prince. On top of that, she also helped maintain some semblance of peace and civility amongst the lionesses after Scar had taken over the Pride Lands and turned her whole life upside down. Also, let's not forget that she fought bravely by Simba's side when he returned to challenge his uncle's reign. There's no doubt that Sarabi played a key role in the first movie. In the second movie, though, as cruel as it sounds, she simply wasn't necessary. In fact, Flip Cobbler, one of the writers of The Lion King 2, mentioned in an old interview that Sarabi was ultimately written out of the sequel because Nala had filled her role. That's really interesting to think about, and it makes a lot of sense. Why spend time writing about a character that wouldn't add anything to that particular storyline? Not to mention, there's the fact that the original voice actor for Sarabi, Madge Sinclair, passed away in December 1995, meaning she wouldn't have been able to reprise her role even if Sarabi was written into the movie. So, based on the fact that she wasn't necessary to the plot and out of respect to her late voice actor, it seems likely that Sarabi wasn't written out of The Lion King 2 because of any particularly crazy reason. It may have simply been because they couldn't find room for her in the story. But what if there was actually more to Sarabi's absence than Disney had led fans to believe? For instance, some fans seem to think that she met the same fate as the Outlanders and was ultimately banished from Pride Rock by her own son. This theory actually combines multiple theories about Sarabi and other characters featured in The Lion King 2, mainly Nuka. You see, it's been heavily debated as to who Nuka's parents were in the second movie. While some fans believe it was Zira, other fans theorize that she actually adopted the young lion because she couldn't have cubs of her own. Well, according to this particular theory, Nuka may have actually been Scar's son, who he had with another lioness in the Pride. Now, out of all the lionesses on Pride Rock, I can think of only one who would put herself between Scar and the rest of them, and that's Sarabi. You see, this theory gets particularly dark because it suggests that Sarabi accepted Scar as a mate solely to save any of the other females in the Pride the horror of doing so. Sadly, the theory continues by claiming that Sarabi would have gotten pregnant with Scar's child, and shortly before Simba returned, she brought Nuka into the world. After Simba took back the Pride Lands, though, he discovered he was no longer an only child, and the theory suggests Nuka, being Simba's possible half-brother, was a potential heir to Scar's throne. Now, as lions do, Simba may have seen this as another lion that might try to follow in Scar's footsteps and take the throne for himself. This is why, even though he loved his mother dearly, this theory suggests that Simba was forced to banish Sarabi along with all of Scar's other followers to the Outlands. Now, as you know, the Outlands were scarce of food and water, which means that Sarabi would have had to try her hardest to keep Nuka alive, and oftentimes likely gave up eating a meal so that her son could eat. Over time and with her age, Sarabi would have grown weaker, and eventually this theory claims that she passed away. Her passing would leave the young cub all alone in the Outlands, and this is where Zira would have come into play. According to the theory, Zira took Nuka in and raised him as her own because she knew that he was connected to Scar and believed that she could shape him into being the next king. However, we all know how that turned out, especially since Zira also seemed to adopt Vatani and Kovu, two cubs that she seemed to care about a lot more than Nuka. But hey, maybe the idea that Nuka was Sarabi's child just ticked Zira off. I know this theory sounds a little extreme, but you have to remember at the end of the day, it's just a theory and it's all in good fun. Now, as crazy as that story would be for Sarabi, do you want to know what the most realistic reason is for her not being shown in the second Lion King movie? Sadly, it seems like the former great Queen Sarabi may have died before the second movie ever took place. Now, for this theory, it's important to note that it uses a lot of facts that we know about real lions in nature as the evidence behind it. You see, according to this theory, it's likely that Sarabi died of old age and relatively peacefully by the time that Lion King 2 rolled around. Let's start by looking at how old Sarabi was by the time Simba was born in the first movie. Based on what we know about lions in nature, most of them will reach what's considered adulthood by the age of 5. This means that the male lions will have fully grown out their manes by then, and lionesses would be ready to begin reproducing. Now, based on the fact that Mufasa obviously had a mane, and he and Sarabi welcomed Simba into the world as their first child, then it's likely that both of the lions were around the age of 5. This also tracks because based on what we can see in the first movie and what we know from side stories, it also stands to reason that Mufasa, Sarabi, and Scar were all around the same ages, with maybe a year or so in between. So then this theory assumes that Sarabi would have been around 5 or 6 years old by the time the first movie began. Now, as you know, Mufasa was killed shortly after Simba's birth, and then Simba was chased out of the Pride Lands by Scar and the hyenas who were trying to kill him. It's unclear exactly how long Simba was supposed to be gone for in the first movie, but if we're basing it on real lions, we know that he had to be at least 4 or 5 years old by the time he returned because he had a full-grown mane. Not only that, but he had grown to his full adult size and was officially ready to take on the current patriarch of the Pride, his uncle. So that would mean that Simba was away from the Pride Lands for anywhere from 3 to 5 years, which would make Sarabi at least 9 by the time he came back. So, if this theory is accurate, by the time peace was restored to Pride Rock and Simba, alongside Nala, was getting ready to welcome his firstborn daughter into the world, Sarabi would have been around 10 years old. That's pretty old for a lion, especially when you consider the fact that the maximum lifespan that we know of for lions in the wild is about 12 years. But just because she was old doesn't mean she was dead yet. In fact, this theory suggests that Sarabi may have still been alive during Kiara's introduction to the Pride Lands. She was simply off screen because she was too old or simply not meant to be there. That doesn't mean that she made it through the entirety of the second film, though, especially when you take into account the events of the Lion Guard TV show, which she also wasn't featured in. You see, by the end of the Lion Guard and the end of the second movie, Kiara, Kovu, and even Kion would have all been in their teen years. This can be determined by the fact that Kovu was shown with a mostly full mane, but still considered to be young when compared to the other full-grown lions like Simba. That would mean that Kiara and Kovu were around 3 years old by the end of The Lion King 2, which would make Sarabi either 12 or 13 years old. As I said before, in the wild, lions tend to only live to be around 12 years old, which would make it possible for her to have died by the end of the second movie. Now, I know what you're thinking. If this was true, why didn't Simba make a big deal of it? Well, if Sarabi died peacefully and of natural causes, then there wouldn't be a reason for Simba to be haunted like he was by Mufasa's death, or even Scar's. Unlike those deaths, Simba couldn't possibly blame himself for his mother's death if this theory was accurate and she died of natural causes. This could be why the writers of the sequel felt like it was best to leave Sarabi out of the story completely. Not only would Nala fill her role as Flip Cobbler suggested, but perhaps they didn't want her death to overshadow what was going on in the Pride Lands at the time. Now, I particularly like this theory because it not only allows Sarabi, one of the best characters in The Lion King, to live out the rest of her life in peace after the return of her son. On top of that, it also explains her absence in The Lion King 2 in a logical way that doesn't leave fans feeling too sad. It's a little sad, but then again, this is where we learned about the circle of life in the first place. Now, out of the theories that I mentioned in this video, which do you think was the most accurate? Was Sarabi left out of The Lion King because she was unimportant to the chosen plot? Was she banished by Simba between the first and second film? Or did she live out her last days in Pride Rock peacefully before dying of natural old age? Be sure to let me know in the comments below.